Glen, a mountain valley in Scotland where many, many generations of my ancestors are buried. And when my heart is sad, I like to go there and sit with the rocks. The history held alive in that land strengthens me. So this is my clan, Clan Malcolm or Mac Colum. The oral history says that my people were the community that formed around St. Columba 1,500 years ago when he first arrived in Scotland. But more on that next week. I come from the land that many of the white people here on Turtle Island came from. And some of you have already talked to me about your Scottish heritage. I know some of the reasons that so many people came here: to escape famine, because their land had been taken away in the clearances, poverty, to escape trauma, persecution, and just for a better opportunity. Yes, colonialization is its own corrupt force of theft, disease, displacement, violence, and genocide. But it is essential we hear that many, many individual stories make up that word colonization. I think it's really prudent for us to listen to these stories, to put humanity back into the system, to give voice to the silent voices and unspoken trauma. So today I'm going to devote quite a lot of the talking time to Indigenous voices. Now, I consider myself to be an Indigenous Scot, but I don't intend to go down that road too much because the impetus for Indigenous Peoples Day, which is tomorrow, is to correct the mistake of Columbus Day and the mindset of colonization and whiteness that thinks nothing of celebrating this man as a hero. I hope that we all already know that Columbus was a homicidal tyrant who initiated the two greatest crimes in the history of the Western Hemisphere: the Atlantic slave trade and the American Indian genocide. It is an astonishing insult and act of ignorance that Columbus Day continues to be called a holiday. And today, rather than share a written book reading, why do that on the day that is so rich in the oral tradition? We're going to hear a story, and I'm delighted to say that Malia, you're here with us on Zoom today. And I was so happy to see your face. I know your face because of, I think I met you once, but also I've been watching the YouTube video that you made. We're going to share that now. So it's a video that talks a little bit about Malia's people, Hawaiian people, the history of the coup and the last monarch, a bit about the people now, and then you share this amazing prayer. Do you want to say anything about it, or do you want me to just show the video? Okay, I will show the video. I need to get this up on screen. Give me a second. Oh, Zoom. Burke, Reverend Diane Burke, would say this: there is nothing so terrible and ugly that God cannot look upon it with love. I really have wrestled with this teaching, especially when I think about genocide and the horrendous violence and injustice committed all over the world again and again to Aboriginal and Indigenous people. There is nothing so terrible that God cannot look upon it with tender love. Now, I personally need this teaching as we embark on Indigenous Peoples Day because I'm so horrified by the legacy of colonization that I begin to shut down. And many of the gorgeous Georgian and Victorian buildings that make up Glasgow and Edinburgh, where I used to live, were built on the money from the slave industry and money invested in the New World. And when I, at 25, landed in Australia for 3 years and witnessed the poverty and social problems of my Aboriginal city neighbours, I was utterly devastated. How can this be normal? And normal it was. And here I am, many years later, in the USA, witnessing a slightly older version of the same living legacy that has harmed so many innocent Indigenous people. I'm learning not to use the language we so much. That's one of the things that I'm learning in my work to overcome racism. But I want to name the fact that many of us on this Zoom call are not Indigenous to the land upon which we sleep, and that this land was stolen. In Vermont, here, where this room is, the Abenaki people were displaced, murdered. They underwent forced sterilization. And as was so common, the children were taken away, sent to boarding schools to kill the Indian culture and spirit. This history is so repulsive to me that it's almost unbearable. And I know that a living history of this is held in the land and in the inherited racist culture and power structures that gets disguised these days as poverty. So I go back and I remember Diane's teaching. There is nothing so horrendous that spirit cannot look upon it with love. And I especially think about this when I want to turn away and increase the distance between the horror of the stories from the past and present and me. But the social justice work of honoring traditional tribal people is essential. And part of that is listening to stories from now and the past that are devastating and unjust and that make us weep. I need to say, I'm not an expert here, far from it. Today, I'm like, why am I the person giving this sermon? But this issue of colonization is something I care about very deeply. So I ask you, please take what is useful from what I share and then add your own wisdom, add your own social justice work to it. Many of you have much more connection with the tribal people in Suquamish and beyond than I do. As I said, I am not an expert here. So I urge us to listen with hearts that can hold trauma with compassion, but also hold an understanding that God's sacred qualities of healing, grief, survival, cunning, and resurrection are also listening. And I point this out because there's a problem that many of us need to overcome when dealing with grave social injustice that we witness. I call it bypasser syndrome. It's that feeling of shock, revulsion, and horror about the things that are beyond my control that I am witnessing or hearing about. This emotional overload shuts down my humanity and spirit, but it also, more importantly, closes off my ability to witness and strengthen the humanity, the courage, and the beauty of those who are actually in the situation. I made a promise once to the ancestors of a genocide. And my promise was to remember their humanity and the legacy of love above the violence and hate that had murdered them. That their life would define them and not their death. Now, this teaching that how somebody lives is to be placed above how they happen to die is a teaching of the Witaha people in New Zealand. They were the Indigenous people, peaceful Indigenous people who lived on the southern island before the Maori and their waka, their long canoes, arrived. And I went to New Zealand last year and I learned about their history. I want to stop and step out of social justice mode to be a minister for a second, a minister about theology. Today, I'm using the word ancestors often, and I'm using it as a substitute for the word God. Now, I really mean this. The word God and the word ancestors are substitutes for me. Just as I use the word Christ to describe an aspect of the mystery of God, so too do I deliberately use the word ancestors to describe the face of a timeless and living presence. If you're interested in knowing more about this, let me know and I'll maybe do another Sunday on that. Back to the promise I made to those ancestors, that I would remember their legacy of love. And that really asks me to think about, what is that commitment today? You know, I am not an ancestor yet. I hold breath and life in my lineage here in this precious moment of time. I have the capacity for influence, prayer, and right action here in my hands and in my heart. And hands and heart are both needed. There's visible work to be done and invisible work to be done. What I mean by that? Well, hands, action for justice for people who are discriminated against. So work of reparations, within restructuring things within our systems and governance, is about being an ally or an elder if you happen to be Indigenous. It's about using our money and our times and our bodies to show up and support our local tribes. Economically, legally, and in many, many tiny ways that on their own don't seem to add up to much, but like water running over the hardest rock, it will break down. I have to admit that I often feel helpless in this work and that there's so little I can do, but that's just not true. Let me tell you one story. Now, it involves my landlady, my former landlady, Pat, who is a very decent human, okay? I want to just say that. I used to live on Gamble Bay, and I was actually on a street that the tribe called the White Fella Street, because they'd sold off this one street and you had to drive into the tribe to get down there. And I tried to do a lot to befriend the tribe, and I got to know their youth worker and their outreach worker, and I offered to repair one of their canoes, but I didn't really get anywhere. The only place I really interacted with the tribe was when they were gathering shellfish on the shore, because it was such a hot, potentially explosive thing that the police had to be there too. And I remember one day in particular, the tribe were there and I went down because I wanted to offer them hospitality. I have been on building sites where there's no bathroom, where there's people staring at you, and I wanted to go down and offer them refreshment and the use of my house. And I went down the jetty and there's my landlady sitting with her arms crossed, really angry that there's migrant workers in there with the tribe. They're commercially harvesting when she thinks that they should only be harvesting for their own meals. And I'm standing there, and between me and the tribe, there's this very, very angry woman that I love and care for. What I do? So I walked down past her, went onto the no man's land, the tide was out, in my wellies, went up to the spokesperson, shook his hand, and said, I am a tribal person from Scotland. I wanted to really honor you, the tribe, on the land. I live in that house there, but I can't because my landlady thinks she owns this land and I can't invite you into my home. But I really want to know that I want you to know that I welcome you here. Now, she didn't hear any of this conversation, and she looked at me kind of funny when I walked back up. And it didn't damage our relationship at all. We understood that we had different perspectives. And on the way back to my house, her two grandkids ran up to me and they said, Simon, what's happening? And I said to them, well, you know that we're on land that's stolen from the tribe? And they were like, yeah. And I was like, well, your grandmother thinks she owns this land, but they own it and they have a right to have a living here. And I just explained the different stories, and then they went back to playing. And when I think about that with hindsight, that's the kind of small situation that will change future generations. In the abbey where I used to live, we used to sing a hymn called The Life of the World. And it would go like this. Oh, the life of the world refreshes where justice is strong. I want us to remember that when we're doing justice work in a good way, God moves with us. So earlier on, I talked about hands and heart are both needed, the invisible and invisible work around the social injustice issue of colonization. I want to, rather than talk about this inner work, which for me really is a lot about forgiveness, I want to share a prayer. And this is how Malia ended up making that video, was because I asked the congregation if you wanted to sing a Ho'oponopono Hawaiian prayer of forgiveness that I use. And many of you did. And this is the prayer. It will take me a little second here. I invite you to click on gallery view for this, so you can see each other, so that we can be seen. Actually, it's more so that we can be seen in our prayers. Can you give me a thumbs up when you hear this? I'm sorry, please forgive me. I thank you and I love you. I'm sorry, please forgive me. I thank you and I love you. Ho'oponopono, 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 Ho'oponopono. I'm sorry, please forgive me. I thank you and I love you. I'm sorry, please forgive me. I thank you and I love you. Ho'oponopono, 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 Ho'oponopono. I'm sorry, please forgive me. I thank you and I love you. Thank you to those of you who joined your voices in that prayer. I'm going to make this available to you. If you would like to pray with the Ho'oponopono that we recorded, email me and I will send you that MP3 file. Yeah. When I went to seminary, each month they devoted a day to a guest speaker. Now, these guest speakers were amazing, but the one who touched me the most was a man called Frank, or Generous Bear, an Indian wisdom keeper. And I'm using his language, not my own. He does not call himself Native American. He's Indian. In that one day, I learned more than any other of the 2 years I went to seminary. So that was the most pivotal day. He taught me so many truths that I had not heard before. He taught me that we all have the same mother. He taught me to pray with my body, my clothing, my movements and breath, just like Malia did 15 minutes ago. I had not seen that before. There is something so powerful in witnessing traditional prayers, the embodiment. You know, Christianity talks about our incarnation, but I really see it in traditional people and their prayers. The pipe ceremony is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. Generous Bear taught me that repatriation of sacred objects is essential, that the objects should be brought back to the tribes, and that I should not take things, objects, songs, teachings, unless they are explicitly given to me. He also taught me that if you, like me, end up as an elder, but without any elders of your own and no tradition that you belong to, then it's okay to find new ways that are inspired by Indigenous ceremony, but are not copies of it, not appropriations. That these new prayers and these new ways of doing things are powerful and working. He also embodied a spiritual practice of giving, something I had never understood as a spiritual practice before. You know, he gave sage tobacco and an arrowhead necklace to all of us. And he also made sure that the 50 people watching on Zoom also received theirs. And at the end, he went around the room and shook hands with all 100 of us. And when it came to me, I just cried. There were no words. I just bubbled like a baby. And because Great Spirit is crafty and wondrous, I did get the opportunity many years later to tell him how very important his teachings were for me. I went to a ceremony and there were Shoshone and Mohawk elders. And when I went to sit in the cafeteria, really busy cafeteria, I sat down and I realized I was sitting next to Generous Bear. I've spent many hours thinking, discerning, and praying with his teaching that we all have the same mother. But there's something more there. There's an incredible love and light that Indigenous people hold. This divinity is to be cherished and held with great respect and care. For reasons of justice and injustice, but also because Indigenous people model for me the right way to approach climate change and caring for Earth as a sacred being, as well as modeling how to bring God out of Sunday mornings and into every detail of my day. So in summary, it's important for us to learn the history of Indigenous people, especially those on whose land you sleep, eat, and have your being. A living history that includes now and tomorrow and includes you and a vibrant next generation, as well as the horrors and mistakes of yesterday and today. And I want to weave in a little piece of Indigenous prayer from where I come from into our offering. We're going to go into the offering now where we mark the talents and money that you gift to the church. I know that many of you donate on the church's website or respond to the weekly newsletter. I want to say thank you for that. And I want us to place our offering and ourselves into a Lorica prayer. A Lorica is it's a Scottish word, and it's a way of invoking the sacred all around you. It's different from calling in the directions, but quite similar in some ways too. So that's what we're going to do right now. I have a slide, or I did. I must have closed it. Give me a second. And friends, I've done it again. I've ran over, so I have to go. So I'm going to close by sending you a wee blessing from Iona, from the island I was on. Deep peace of the running wave to you. Deep peace of the flowing air to you. Deep peace of the quiet earth to you. Deep peace of the shining stars to you. Deep peace of the Son of Peace to you, And moon and stars pour their healing light on you. Wrap this around you like a blanket until we meet again, and stay on for coffee hour, even though I have to run away. Love and peace to you.